I really just want white to get a clue.
Well, maybe you should investigate. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan, and today we are going to be talking about Boros. No, wait, I'm sorry. Lorehold, that's what we're talking about today. I'm sorry, I got it wrong. I'm an old school player. It's Lorehold we're talking about today. We have brought on an awesome guest for today's discussion, and that guest's name is Alex. Alex, how are you doing? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm fantastic, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. As you might know, I'm a member of the Spike Feeders. We're a Canadian content group, primarily doing EDH content. And I'm just really excited to sit down and chat with you today.
Awesome. Great. And I can't wait to have this conversation. I think it's going to be a really, really good one. But before we get into that conversation today, I want to talk to you quickly about our promos. They are TCG Player, they are Dragon Shield, and they are Patreon. TCG Player, it's really good to go out there. Check out the link in the description below. You get awesome prices on your cards. You still get to support local game stores in the process. Dragon Shield, to protect all of those cards you just purchased. They are one of the number one, in our opinion, as far as the standard for accessories go. And then finally, support from all the viewers and listeners like you. Your support on Patreon really goes a long way, and we put a lot of time into making sure that you get more than your money's worth back into it, because this content is very important to us, and you guys providing this financial support helps us bring more content to you all. You get awesome perks in return: Discord access, raw gameplay, behind the scenes footage, bloopers and outtakes, all that kind of crazy stuff. Some tiers will even give you higher benefits, like being able to be on an episode with us. All these great things that are available inside of Patreon. So check out all the links in the description below, and we really highly appreciate it. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into today's topic. And today's topic is Lorehold, Boros, Lorehold, whatever it is, but not necessarily specifically just the red-white color pair. Today we're going to be talking about Lorehold, and maybe specifically some of the more things that have been coming out recently, such as Alibu, are starting to help us close the synergy gap in EDH. And we're going to be talking with Alex about that a lot today. So first of all, let's just start from the very beginning. So Alex, from your perspective, tell me a little bit what you feel that Lorehold / Boros is from an EDH perspective.
Absolutely. Well, I think the first thing that a lot of folks will tell you is that Boros, Lorehold, up until Lorehold rather, are the weakest color pair. They can only turn sideways. They got to deal 120 damage. That's basically all they do. It's outside of a few cute combos, like Aurelia Helm, things like that. You're not really going to see a whole lot of strictly red-white decks at most higher power tables, to say nothing of CEDH. And so, generally speaking, when I talk about something like the synergy gap, what I'm talking about is the relative level of options backups that high, powerful, efficient cards exist in those color pairs. Because obviously, we've got a whole bunch of examples in some other colors, but we're starting to see those types of tools start to exist in the Boros color pairs as well.
So when we say we're talking about closing a synergy gap between Boros and the rest of EDH, or Lorehold and the rest of EDH, that is to suggest that there is actually a gap present. And a lot of times, I'm sure all of our viewers will immediately say, well, obviously Simic, or Prismari. Is it Prismari?
I think that one's Quandrix, if I'm remembering.
See what I'm saying? I'm such a Strixhaven noob. I apologize.
It's okay.
We've just lost half our subscriber count. I'm sorry.
Oh, jeez.
I haven't followed. I should get better. I'm sorry. I apologize. You should see how long it took me to remember the names of the wedges. But whatever, it doesn't matter. Anyway, as we were saying, that's to suggest that there is a big gap. Mm-hmm. Right. And a lot of people immediately go to green, blue. They're kind of the big gap. So in your words, tell me, why do you think that green and blue are currently favored in EDH?
Well, I think it comes down to some very simple game mechanics and some really complex social mechanics. And I think they're two very different problems, but they compound to make especially white's time hard, but additionally red-white's time hard. Specifically, I think green and blue are so favored in EDH because they do the two things that you really need to do to be successful at, especially that step below CEDH. They draw you cards and they ramp your lands, right? If you can't cast your spells, you're not doing anything. If you don't have spells to cast, you're also not doing anything. And those are pretty much the two primary colors for that. And so when we talk about green and blue or Simic more generally getting nice things, what we're talking about is the shift that we've seen sort of since that Battle for Zendikar era, where green was not very good. They didn't get a lot of tools, especially in the standard timeline. The problem is what happened is Wizards took those standard woes, fixed them for standard environments, overtuned them for standard environments, and now we have this eternal format, EDH, that has to absorb all of those. I don't want to go so far as to call them mistakes, but it's hard to find a different word. And so when we talk about that piece of it, just the gameplay piece of it, it's very difficult because White has routinely been told, no, you can't draw cards. Yes, you can land ramp, but only in very specific ways, and in a lot of cases only on very hard to find cards, because up until land tax got reprinted, that was a very expensive piece to go and find. And that was one of the better things you could ever do. And so that's sort of the gameplay aspect of it. The other part that I think is really tough, especially for the White half of Boros, is socially. The things that White is overwhelmingly good at, that they have a lock on, is locks, stacks, pieces, and hate bears, right? The problem with that is if you walk up to 5 tables, maybe one table as a genuine pod is going to be all right with a very stacksy game. First of all, it's bad for tournaments. It's bad for sit and blind play. It's not fun for some folks. It tilts folks so badly sometimes that it is a fairly reasonable thing for folks out there today to have to ask to play those type of strategies rather than tell people, hey, I'm going to be playing this strategy just as a heads up. And so those two factors, the game design factor, which it has some basis, as along with the social factor, I think compound the issue. So then the question comes, what do we do about it?
I think that's really astute, because I frequently have been a proponent of that, of White, through lack of a better word, you have to play White with its hands tied behind its back. So often you see situations where there are certain quote-unquote untouchables in an EDH format, which is you're not allowed to touch my hands and you're not allowed to touch my lands. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure, you can wipe the creatures if you want, no big deal. But if you start to do things like Armageddon, all of a sudden you got people on tilt. You got people that say, well, no, hold on, I don't want to play that. Well, the thing is that White is a very, very rules enforcement color, in my opinion. I'm going to either punish you for breaking the rules, or I'm going to enforce that those rules are there. Things like drawing one card every turn. That's a rule of Magic. And so many cards try and let you break that rule of Magic, drawing multiple cards every turn. Well, White comes in to reinforce those rules. And sometimes that might be, hey, you're going to overextend on lands? Well, too bad, I'm going to blow them all up. And now we're all even again. So equality, exactly. Everyone's even. Well, people don't like that. And so now you've tied one arm or both arms behind White's back, and then turn around in the very next breath and says, well, White's a really weak color. Well, maybe White's a weak color because you're not letting it do what it wants to do.
And I think that's really what it is. And that's okay. I think there's some fair basis for folks to not want to play against those things. I think by and large, from a play experience standpoint, I really don't want to play against someone who, with my own stacks deck, against somebody who doesn't want to play against stacks. That sounds miserable both for me and for them. So I completely understand that. But that presents a really interesting challenge to game designers, right? So I've got this really well fleshed out color pie. I feel like I've got a good idea what I'm doing with it. And in comes all these kids saying, oh my God, my White cards, they don't do anything. What do I do? Help me, Mark Rosewater. And don't get me wrong. Should they be doing something? They should. Absolutely the case. And I think we're starting to see the first dregs of it. Sort of like we started to see Impulse Draw in Red over the last 4 to 5 years. And so when we talk about this new Impulse Draw, what we did is we saw a different way for Red to get into the card advantage game. Yeah, is it risky? Yeah, but that's Red, right? It's very flavorful, it's on point, and it does things that seem good. White is starting to get there with the other cards we've seen, along with the mix between the two that blends in a unique way that doesn't lose the identity of Boros, which is that sort of attacky, get after things, play with artifacts and equipment stuff, without being what I feel like we risk running into if we keep going down this road of white's so bad, please help me, Mark, which is where we're in the same place we are with green and to a lesser extent blue right now. And so what that looks like to me is this stuff that we've been seeing with stuff like Archaeomancer's map, which allows you to burgeoning up to same number of lands. It's stuff like Keeper of the Accord that allows you to generate soldiers and do the same thing with lands on end steps. It's pieces like Alibu. And I think I really hope I'm right about this, but I really would like to see more of, if you're swinging with all your stuff or swinging with a subset of stuff, scry X. I asked a question on Twitter a couple of weeks back. The question was basically, would you rather draw 2 or scry 3 and draw 1? Right? I think that that's a very difficult question to ask. And I think that question gets rougher and rougher and rougher the higher the scry gets. At a certain point, you're essentially stacking your deck with a card like Alibu. I've seen people dome someone for 8 and stack their next 3 draws. Now, granted, you're not going to get access to those cards until turn after turn after turn, but you've just set yourself up either with the gas you need or with the lands you need. And those are the types of effects, whether it be damage, whether it be card draw, whether it be land out of your library, so you're more likely to hit gas. I feel like there's a bunch of different ways white can play around with those types of effects that's more beneficial without being just straight up white gets draw 3. Because obviously Secret Rendezvous I don't really think hit the right way, especially in a Commander game. And so those are the types of things that I'd really like to see us push into, and I think that we're going to see more of. Because I don't think, based on what I've seen so far, that Wizards has really figured out where they want the stops to be on green and blue as well as they have on white and red.
I definitely think that there's something really to be said there, especially about the scry mechanic. One of the things I think that people gravitate towards green and blue is it's that first dimension of advantage. It's that first dimension functionality in the game. You have a situation where I want to get more lands, that's more resources. I want to draw more cards, that's more resources. It's very easy to understand. And it's very easy to do. You always feel like you're doing a lot. I cast a Cultivate, I'm getting 2 cards, I'm doing all this stuff. I'm brainstorming, I'm drawing 3 cards, and I'm deciding what to put back, and things like that. So you have these interactions that provide these resources to you, but people don't often think about the additional dimension that you just spoke of. Scry is such a powerful card. An example of that, which is probably maybe not the best example, but it's always the one that comes to my mind first, is Dig Through Time. Basically, you get to look at 7 cards off the top of your library and pick the best 2 out of those. Yeah. Now, if you're swinging and turning sideways with Alibu, maybe you don't get them in your hand. Yes, I'll give you that. It's not advantage. But the idea of you saying, I'm going to sculpt my next 3 turns and maybe burn those 3 lands away because I'm late in the game, put those to the bottom. I don't need those anymore. Or, even say, wow, I'm really low on lands. I'll swing to the, I'll swing Alibu and, maybe just make sure I hit a land. Those types of effects that are not so overt are actually really powerful, and people don't frequently look at them. And that is such a really, I think it's a really good space for them to explore in. And I really like where they're going with it.
Me too. Specifically, I think the best piece I've seen is the way they moved from these precons in Strixhaven's set for Horizons 2 flavor, where the draft flavor for red-white is modular artifacts, which I got to be honest, when I started seeing those pop off, I just said to myself, wow, I really hope they keep going down this road. Because if non-flying artifact creatures that grow as you lose them becomes the red-white pseudo-identity, I think that's really powerful. I think that gives you design space for things like Esper Sentinel to fit in. It gives you design space for things like Osgear that gets you 2 of whatever you're working with. I think that's the kind of piece that shows that WotC is trying to find creative solutions for this problem that has sort of reared its head, partially through the social contract, but also because of the way they've designed the color pie over the years. And so what I see more than anything else is that the problem that Boros has is that it can't use its current good stuff because it just doesn't fit into the philosophy of EDH. So that means if you're going to be designing for EDH, you need to change what that philosophy looks like. Because as much as some people might want to say, well, red gets tiny, efficient creatures. Well, no, not really. That's red and green if I'm going to do the tiny, efficient creatures. Oh, well, they get hate bears. The thing about hate bears is everyone hates them. Board wipes, red and black get those too. And so there's not a whole lot that white even gets. I actually went on a rant the other day on my own podcast about Honor Troll when that came out, because it was a life total matters, gain more life when you gain life card in mono green. And that really salted my craw. Of all the things that white shouldn't be losing right now, or shouldn't be letting have borrowed from it, I definitely think lifelink and lifelink synergy effects is probably top of the list, because I think that's one of the very few things that they have that is firmly theirs. And so I think that was a little sad to see.
Yeah, in the old days, we definitely saw things like Stream of Life and stuff like that in green, but then it kind of quintessentially became the white mechanic. Lifelink is the white mechanic. Gaining life is the white mechanic. And you just see all of these different things being quote-unquote robbed from white left and right. And unfortunately, for some reason, white doesn't get to quote-unquote rob it back. Where's my white card draw that doesn't have such a severe downside I don't even want to run it? Why are people able to take all of white's great silver bullets and make them their own silver bullets? And why are they doing it in such a way that there's no reciprocity in it? Be like, well, green's gonna get life now, but that also mean white gets ramp,
Sure. Or maybe white gets when a creature enters the battlefield, draw a card. Even that alone. Can you imagine having Beast Whisperer in white even at 4 CMC, I think Beast Whisperer is.
It is.
And so that's the type of card that would make white feel better pretty close to overnight, right? And it's just unfortunate that we're not seeing that. On the other half of stuff, when we talk about red, we've seen the steps that they've been taking. We've seen the types of cards that are coming out and making a splash. Things like Dockside Extortionist. Like I said before, Impulse Draw. There's all sorts of little pieces that red has been getting over the last few years, or having become more accessible over the years because of reprints. Things like, not so much for EDH, but like we were talking earlier before the show, Imperial Recruiter. Those are some high quality reprints. And I understand that balance is banned in the format, but it's those types of effects, the powerhouse, roundhouse, I can close the game out if I can get this to resolve, things that white doesn't seem to get, or when they do seem to get it, they seem to get it at 9 mana. And with a level of ramp you're able to do in white, that might as well be the heat death of the universe.
I think you make a really good point. Red has been getting a lot. Red used to be right up there with white, being like, man, they just don't have any good things. And now they were like, yeah, red's powerful. It is a powerful color. So much to the point where in formats like CEDH, you actually start to miss a lack of red. Your old Timna Thrasios list, you're like, wow, I just need to go 2 different. I don't have Dockside in here. That's really sad. I don't got a Maybe I'll use Phantasmal Image, get my own Dockside. So, which just goes to show you how much effort they have been making towards red. We've seen major not archetypes, but major strategies just coming out of some of the red cards that have been coming out. Dockside Extortionist, Underworld Breach, these types of cards doing such great work and still being on flavor with red. Dockside Extortionist feels red.
Absolutely. It's trying to punish your opponents for being so greedy. And I love it, because it doesn't punish them by taking their toys away. It just says, oh, great, now I have all the mana. And I love it.
And I think punish is a great word, because I believe that I think white could make a lot of strides in the I'm going to punish you for breaking the rules game. The quintessential huge boon that we have seen lately is Smothering Tithe. Sure, draw all the cards you want. I'm going to punish you for them. You're going to pay your tax on it. So yeah, I don't have to have the treasure, but you need to make sure you're paying the tax to prevent it. And so punishing you for doing this. Esper Sentinel, another classic example. Cast your first non-creature spell. You need to pay at least 1 to make sure I don't get a card out of that. You don't have to. So if you still want to continue the game plan, that's fine. But I'm going to punish you for breaking these rules.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really good segue into something I want to talk about, which is sort of the limits of card design, of color pie breaks. And I think by and large, Wizards has really figured out how to put the brakes on white effects. They know when they need to have intervening clauses. They know when they need to say only once each turn. They know when they need to nest it beneath 3 different triggering conditions. You know, like on Alibu, what is it? It's whenever another artifact creature you control attack, blah, 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 equal to number of tapped artifacts. So you're like drawing from 3 separate places to make the effect happen, right? Whereas I just don't see the same type of restraint being exercised when it comes to designs like Uro, when it comes to designs like even Endurance out of the new Evoke cycle of cards in Modern Horizons 2. And I can't 100% fault Wizards for that. I mean, obviously these cards were probably turned in, late 2019, maybe even mid 2019, by and large before this whole wave of white doesn't get anything resentment really kicked off. On the same token, though, when we talk about cards that have emerged, I don't know what your experience is with it, but my experience has been when you play cards like Smothering Tithe, or you see cards like Smothering Tithe talked about, they get talked about as though they're overwhelming and too much, when they're barely enough to be relevant, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Smothering Tide is a great splash support. I'm not going to see that in helming up and making a mono white deck win. In fact, I think mono white is great if it's full of artifacts. And I think that's a little bit sad, but if that's where we're at, I think that's where we've got to lean into it. And so that's why I'd like to see more and more mono white colored artifacts as we've been progressing through. This is stuff like Esper Sentinel. But the problem is at some point, unless we see a deliberate and frankly rather aggressive restriction of the stuff green has been getting and blue has been getting throughout the last 5 years or so, white can't catch up because we don't have the redundancy. And that's where I say that the blocks have to come off to a certain extent. Now, if you want to sit there and you want to say a Smothering Tithe was a color pie break and it was broken and Monologue Tax is the better version of it, go off, King, I guess. It just doesn't hold water to me when you've got effect after effect after effect in green all on the same game plan, to the point where you can essentially build mono green ramp and have a good shot at winning most commander games you're going to play, because the synergies are there and they're protected by social convention. And so I think we need to see more of that break away, some of the firmness of white's color pie break away, so they can explore a little more. Do I want white to be saying, pay 3, draw 2? No, I don't want that. But what I would like is I would like to see more investigation into these sorts of, if you can meet a few requirements, unlimited payoff, as opposed to you met a few requirements, limited payoff. Because I just don't see the same expectations being met in other colors.
Yeah, I would definitely say that we, once again, going back to the Simic argument, we've been seeing nothing but just basically no limit, no ceiling. Whereas we have with things like red and white, we've not only do we see a ceiling, it's a pretty low one. Like Secret Rendezvous is a classic example of, let's just have this bananas horrible ceiling just in order to give white 2 cards. That's what you're really giving. You're trading a card, getting 3. You replaced your 1, you got 2 more. Oh, by the way, somebody got 3 more too. And those are the types of things that you don't see green having. You don't see blue having. And when that happens, you say to yourself, why does Lorehold always get the short end of the stick? Why do they always get nerfed? But that also begs another really important question. Do you think, about everything we've said so far, that Boros actually, or Lorehold, I'm going to call it Borehold for the rest of the episode. I'm sorry.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
I'm old school, Lorehold. Anyway.
It's good.
Do we think that it needs help? And I want to put a little context into that. So sure. Does it need help? I'm not saying, do we need to make Boros like Simic? I'm saying, do we feel that there is a place where maybe something else needs to happen in order to make Boros quote unquote viable. Is it a social thing? Is it a card thing? Does it even need help? Does it even need it?
Yeah. And so I think that depends on where you're sitting. I think if you're sitting in a place like standard or modern, the answer's probably no. I actually do think that by and large, those sorts of 60 card formats, Wizards has gotten really good at. Like, Limited recently has been pretty solid. I mean, Kaldheim was one of the best limited sets of all time. They've really found their stride in certain aspects of design, and I think they're doing very, very well for it. What I don't think that they're doing as well is seeing how much power they have either put out over time or are currently putting out, and the rate at which that climb happens. Because for every Alibu that comes out, we've got a Thrasta and a Chatterfang and an Endurance, you know? And so it's not so much that we need some overwhelming majority of cards to come out super powerful in white and red. What we really need more than anything else is a consistent design vision around something slightly more than can attack real good and stuff. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to lose that identity. I don't want to see that go away. But at the same time, Wizards has to acknowledge, if this is a goal of theirs, and I'm not saying it has to be, if the goal is to make all 5 colors feel viable at most EDH tables, they need help. Now, when we get into some lower power games, I actually feel like this problem gets worse. I really do feel that as you go down the power rankings, so to speak, I hate the idea of power rankings, but as you go down the efficiency curve, let's say it that way, as you go down the efficiency curve, white and red drop off extremely hard because you're out of stacks, you're out of hate bears, you're into quote-unquote fair magic, and they just don't really have the tools outside of a few very narrow strategies to play in that space. Because even if you're not necessarily rampant growthing, you might be explosive vegetationing. Even if you're not, let's say, Rhystic studying, you might be divining, right? Or casting divination. Sorry, I can't really adjectivize a card.
Is that a word?
Yeah, divination. Yeah. Wow, that is tough. What do you do with that? Anyway, the point is that there are certain colors that have a depth to them, and so far it just doesn't feel like the things that white and red are good at have that same depth, and they don't have the same applicability. On the other hand, I really do want to talk a little bit about how well black seems to fit into its own mold right now. I think Wizards actually, if anything, can hold up black's design over the last 5 to 6 years as a major win. It's powerful, but balanced. It has risks, but you get paid for your rewards. It has clear, playable, usable archetypes without infiltrating other colors and stealing things away, except unless the exact thing that you're trying to do is steal other things away. Because we've seen that stuff with Conti and whatnot. And the new Dothy Shadowstalker. Mm-hmm. Voidstalker? Whatever.
It's Void.
Point is that that's the color, in my opinion, that has the best thing going for it right now, because it has over time been allowed to essentially sample anything, including enchantment removal, albeit in a very narrow and limited way, so long as you're willing to accept risk. And unfortunately, White's ethos is simply, I get to do only the things I get to do, and not very well. And that's really the problem, because as soon as you take away those hate bears, the stacks, those pieces, what are you left with? White weenies? Well, congratulations, here's a damnation. Like, it just really sucks.
I think you've hit such an interesting point there that I think not enough people are talking about the financial aspect of this game. This is not going to turn into an NTG finance, podcast. Mm-hmm. What I'm talking about is, yes, you want to get some really powerful tools. Of course, we can make Boros super powerful. It's just going to cost you $2,000.
Yeah,
and that's an insurmountable cost to throw into a 100-card deck. That is such a large number. And you said the drop off of these are so great, because what is the average cost of an EDH deck out in the wild? What's the way to quantify that? And the idea of cost factoring into these creates such an interesting third dimension to this metric that so few people, I think, are actually talking about.
I think a piece of that comes down to when did it get its power? Because if you really look at the things that are quote unquote powerful in white, that Wizards is worried about enabling, they're all old. They're all very old. You can say as much as you'd like about how much it sucks to play against a stacks lock, and I agree, it can. Absolutely. But if I'm going to price out one of my stacks lock decks, I mean, you're running 4 figures before you open the door. I don't think that, especially for newer players, they're going to have a good time if you sort of funnel them into these pre-made strategies. Now, again, I want to say that that's different, and I'm enheartened by what I'm seeing out of Lorehold, but I don't want them to do a sort of one-and-done thing like they're sort of known for doing with these products. I hope that on the basis that they included some of the synergy in Modern Horizons 2, that we're going to see, if not necessarily in standard, in supplementary products, this idea of white and red can collaborate on artifacts to do actual good stuff. It keeps going, because I haven't seen it too much, but my suspicion is, based on some of the gold fishing I've been able to do, that full support Alibu might not be tier 0 CEDH, but I think it could hang. It has the ability to pump out a bunch of free, cheap artifacts that are all rocks that are putting you on plan, and you could be untapping and swinging with an Alibu and a Buddy on turn 3, and that's huge. Now, do you have enough interaction and stacks pieces to last the game? Maybe, maybe not, but that's all going to come down to your meta. And the thing is when we look at some of those pieces that would allow white to hang in on a table like that, what are they? Pyroblast, Red Elemental Blast, Lapse of Certainty, all these old, broken cards that, if you really look at them, don't do anything that other colors don't do better, more efficiently, and with huger payoff. But now we're starting to see the same sort of thing leak out, once again, into colors like green. I think Endurance is maybe one of the biggest mistakes that they've printed in a long time. And it's because it's too cheap for its body, it has too much effect for its evoke, and ultimately, unlike the other 4, Endurance doesn't say deal with a problem, it says counter target game plan. And I think that it's wild that more people don't differentiate between this shuts down a game plan and this shuts down a card. Because if we look at the white one, it's what is it? Swords to Plowshares on a body, right? Yeah, you're dealing with one creature. Subtlety, you're dealing with one spell. Grief, you're pulling one card out of the hand. Don't get me wrong, Fury, you can shoot a couple of little guys, but ultimately you're probably going 1-for-1 with Fury. But Endurance says target dredge player loses the game. Target fish combo fizzles.
Target Muldrotha player starts from 0.
Exactly. And so it's pieces like that I see green get. To a lesser extent, I see black get. That don't draw the same amount of social hate that even something as innocuous as a Thalia does. And all Thalia is doing is asking you, hey, please stop interacting with stuff. Right? That's all that a Thalia says. And so having that differentiation in approach and evaluation of cards, I think, is something that I really would like to see. I don't want to say less of, but I'd like to see that change in the way people assess things. Because I think a lot of the times when people are having the white is bad conversation, they're not really saying that white as an overall piece is bad. Because up at our top level, having white in your deck's definitely a good thing. You get things like Smothering Tide, you get some removal. It's really not that bad. What it is it's a support color. And what I'd like to see is more reasons, at double white, maybe even triple white, to run it as a primary color and sort of pay off this idea of investing heavily in, for lack of a better term, in devoting yourself to a primary color in a deck. Because I think, by and large, the hodgepodge of partners and ease of 4-color has sort of diluted that idea as time's gone on. And I would really like to see more payoffs in colors that aren't green-blue. Because frankly, if you put a gun to my head right now and said you have to pick 2 colors and you have to compete, well, that's what I'm going to have to pick.
Yeah, and I think that maybe is an also interesting observation too, because you have situations where you say, oh, green and blue is just so much better. This gets into a classic buffs over nerfs kind of conversation that you see in other types of competitive things, fighting games examples, fighting games, etc. You have a situation where it's not that white is bad or red is bad. It's just that it seems bad in comparison to the overwhelming good that they seem to keep giving green and blue. Everything that you just mentioned about endurance is a classic example of this. So we have endurance for 1 and 2 green. It has flash, like so many of them did, except for Fury. For some reason, it didn't have flash. Like
I think they were trying to avoid the double strike feel bad there, but yeah.
But also at the same time, like all these other cards, you know, the same cost, exile X card from your hand to do the effect. Why is endurance a 3/4?
Yeah, it's the only one at 3. They're all 4 or above. I mean, heck, White, Solitude, and Fury are both 5.
Yeah. Like, I understand that you say, oh, well, I'm never going to be casting this for its regular cost. I'm going to be always evoking it. Sure. Why, for no reason, make green a 3/4 for 3 when other ones, like you said, are 4 CMC or 5 CMC and they're weaker? I mean, not even going into their effects. Like, why do they do that? Why are they just making these, just by and large, so much better than the other colors? And there's something to be said about they're not nerfing white. They're just buffing green. They're just buffing blue so much that it's making white seem so nerfed in comparison.
Well, and I think part of it is when we talk about that, and I'm not trying to say that, oh, green, you don't deserve to have toys. Obviously you do.
Yeah.
But the toys you deserve to have are, in my opinion, things like Thrasta, Tempest Roar. That's the type of card that when I look at it, I say, yeah, that makes sense to me. You're making green do something that it's not very good at. Casting multiple spells in a turn, you're forcing them into a distinct play pattern, and then you're paying it off with something that's on flavor. Love it to bits. Love it to bits. And don't be wrong, I think that's a powerful card, a 7/7 that can't be interacted with the turn it comes into play. What is it? Trample Haste and Trample over Planeswalkers, which, oh boy, let me tell you, do I hope to see that printed more often.
Good flavor.
What a good
flavor.
What a good ability.
Yes.
But it's a big dumb dinosaur at the end of the day. And that's something I think green deserves. I think green deserves big dumb dinosaurs. What I don't think green deserves, and I know this is probably going to get me some hate from especially one of my friends if she listens to this, is I don't think green deserves a Jund hierarch. You've already got, what is it?
Noble.
Like 8 of the 9 best dorks in the game. You just don't need another one. And this is what I come back to with the redundancy is there's so many levels at which you can play green stuff that you've always got a package of a dork, a ramp, a big beater. And the same synergy doesn't exist for white and red.
No.
But we're getting there. We're going to get there. And I think Wizards has the game plan for it. And so what I'd really like to see is not so much for green to slow down. Let me back that up. I would like to see green slow down from endurances. I don't want to see green slow down from Thrastas. But white needs to start getting 1 or 2 endurance level pieces. And I think we've seen that a little bit in cards like Alabu, and especially in cards like Archaeomancer's Map. I actually am super high on that card. I think it's great.
I think Keeper of the Accord is a really classic example of a fantastic white card. Hey, I'm going to be able... Oh, you want to do more creatures? That's fine. Once again, going back into that punishment things. I'm going to go find a planes. I'm going to go find... I'm going to create a soldier. I'm going to be able to balance what you do. You're going to spend resources, and I'm not. So you don't have to do it, and I won't get it. Or you don't have to ramp beyond everyone else, and then I won't get it. But if you break those rules, I get to catch up to you. This is a classic example of a really great stride without losing the color's identity. Like, a frequent thing that people say is give ramp to white, give card draw to white, and just, for lack of a better word, what they're trying to say is make white green, make white blue. So my question is, do you feel with the things that they are doing currently that white is losing its identity? Do you think they're finding a good balance? Do you think there's a little bit more to be done there? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. So I think, like I mentioned much earlier, there are certain cards like Honor Troll that I feel are impinging, but color pie bends and color pie breaks, they happen all the time. We're not going to relitigate that. The piece here that I think is of interest is, what is the Boros color identity? Like, a gun to my head, I'd have to say combats, right? I play with the combat step. The problem is the combat step isn't worth a whole heck of a lot unless you're going aggressively into some really unfair things, like Gisella's, your Aurelia's, aggravated assault with Neheb, right? Then you can pay that off. That's a way to pay that off. The problem is it requires so much setup and so much digging and so much card advantage before you even get the engine rolling. Mm-hmm. And it all gets undone by a single wrath. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that is awkward. Now, I can definitely see a world where Wizards gives up, listens to the folks who are a little bit less nuanced in having this conversation, who are saying, make it ramp, make it draw. And yes, white doesn't really have an identity anymore. And so you have cards like Sanctum Weaver coming out in green. And don't get me wrong, I understand green is an enchantress color, but that effect was, in a lot of ways, one of white's claims to fame, right? Add mana to my mana pool equal to my enchantments. That's so white. Mm-hmm. And now it's green. And I understand things move and they drift and they shift, but it really does feel at this point that there's not too many things you could print on a card so long as it had green background, where I would say, oh, I guess that's out of the color pie. Like, I really just don't know what green doesn't get at this point.
And I think this will go into a good follow-up where you say, what is Boros's color identity? What does it do? And you said combat. Like, yeah. I would even go insofar as to say equipments in combat. I think both of those would go well. And then I will pose the same question to you for the other colors. What's green? What is green's color identity?
5 years ago, I would have told you big, beefy boys.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. That would have been a consistent, logical thing to say. You would have said a little bit of land ramp, a little bit of creatures matter. All consistent. At this point, though, they get stack interaction with things like Veil of Summer. Mm-hmm. They get not direct damage with one-sided fights. Mm-hmm. They get protection. They get enchantments. They get card draw. They get ramp. They get graveyard recursion. About the only thing I don't see green do that often is interact with the library. And even then, that's all of a splash away for most of these decks. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really what I mean by this is, what is green? And that's what we're starting to lose a little bit with the way they've been pushing green. And one of the things I want to mention here is, what happened, aside from squirrels being green, to make squirrels green? If you look at it from a purely mechanical perspective, something like that new artifact, the Chitter Spitter or whatever it was.
Chitter Spitter. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chitter Spitter. It's an anthem and a token generator. That's assemble the ranks with extra steps. Mm-hmm. Oh, worse than that, it's a more efficient assemble the ranks.
Yep.
Or assemble the legion, sorry. And it's those sort of effects that when they start taking from the other colors, when they start having all of these effects congregate under a single banner, it really dilutes them. And not in a way that's straightforward and interesting and fun, but in a way that feels very mushy, gushy, samey. Because if there's just one clear, correct choice, and this is something I've said a lot, diversity and options are what really make things. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're lacking right now.
So they've been doing this Year of Commander back in 2020, and 2021 is definitely, from at least a Commander player's perspective, the continuation of that. In a lot of good ways and some bad as well. I will rant and rave about how much I loved the C21 decks.
Oh, they were so good.
They were, I could talk about them all day long, and a lot of people take an initial look and say, and they cross their arms. And they say, well, there's not a whole lot of really great cards in it, because there wasn't one single fierce guardianship or dockside extortionist that sold the whole deck while you threw the other 99 into the garbage. And that's why I think C21 was so good. We have Golgari, essentially, that makes food and gains life? Wow. I mean, amazing. Osgear and Lorehold, if you will, saying, no, this isn't about turning sideways with equipments and creatures. This is about doing stuff with your graveyard and putting, doubling, creating these artifacts. And there's just so many avenues you can take with that. You can be super hostile and mean by doubling up stacks effects. You can be super tall by doubling up things like Steel Hellkites and Mere Battle Spheres, or you can double up on go wide strategies by doubling up on those types of things. I'll create 2 Memnites that cost me nothing.
Yeah.
Now you're going to have to
That's
remove
great.
2 of them. Such amazing new spaces that they are being put into. And I think those are some great strides that they're taking. I want to take a quick diversion here and talk about a super overlooked but super amazing Lorehold commander. Not necessarily from C21, but just in Strixhaven itself. Quintorius Field Historian. So many people
good.
overlook this card. I'll read it real quick. It's 3 and red-white. Legendary creature Elephant Cleric. It's a 2/4. Spirits you control get +1/+0. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. Okay.
Yep.
How
Super great.
amazing is that ability?
It's so good because you're finally giving white and red a reason to care about resources they haven't had to care about in the past. They care about what's coming out of the yard and how it can be used. Because obviously we're not going to get blacks, recur anything I want anytime. We're not going to get greens do whatever I want at any point in time. But what we can have is, okay, you're going to run something like Escape. You're going to get one, you're going to get the other. Great. Doubled up. Value. You want to run something like a Delve card. Great, here's some value. It's a way to incrementally increase what you're doing. One of my favorite things with that, Grim Lavamancer. You turn something that I don't think anybody would ever think to play in EDH and turn it into a genuine engine and threat. And I love it for that. It's playing around with the type of space and the type of resources that those colors haven't traditionally had access to in a way that feels flavorful and not wildly broken.
This doesn't feel like a black card to me. This feels
Exactly.
like a Lorehold card to me. When I can cast my Sun Titan, it enters, I'll create a 6/6 and a 4/2 spirit by doing that because it will enter. I basically created all of this advantage both from my cards and virtual. That's an amazing thing that they're doing with Lorehold. And those are the spaces I think are the ones they should double down in, because I agree with a lot of people when people say, don't just give them card draw. Don't just give them ramp, because you're right. People want that identity because, Magic is a form of self-expression. I'm a red player. Everyone can say what type of player they are, and they can do it without even thinking, what type of player are you?
Oh, I'm Boros all the way.
Yeah. I'm a red player. I will always gravitate towards red. I've always done that. It's just what I look for. It's part of my, self-expression. It's part of my identity. So when you just make white like green, you become disheartened and disinterested because you're like, I'm a white player. I love doing things that white does. And then all of a sudden I put together this white deck and it just feels like a green deck. And so I don't like it, So those are the types of things that I think that they're doing really great strides with this Lorehold identity and these new commanders, especially, like I said, coming back full circle back into C21. Really great design spaces.
Yeah. And so with all that, I think ultimately, at the end of the day, what I'd really like to see moving forward is more effects that take advantage of what you were talking about there, synthetic card advantage, whether it's by quality of your scries, ability to use effects that catch you up in taxes rather than necessarily punishing other players, because I think people have a much more expansive view of those type of effects, whereas saying, oh no, you can't play more than one land a turn, people hate that. But if they say, oh well, if you play more than one land a turn, I also get to play one, that they don't really care about. And so if we can change this sort of stacks and tax into everybody get along, I think that's where we find our biggest upswing for red-white. There's another card that got printed in Modern Horizons 2. I think it's called Search the Premises. It's a 4 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, investigate. And so you're making clues off of that. What I'd like to see is if we're going to go into a world where clues, food, treasure are all evergreen. And frankly, I kind of like that world. I think that's a good place to go for the game in general. So just like as a thing, I think that's really good. I would like to see white and to a certain extent red get more of the bonuses we've been seeing them get, because red seems to be getting this, your treasures do stuff for you. You know, whether it's double mana or when they come into play, you can do extra things with them, whatever the case might be. I'd like to see white get more of that sort of thing in their clue tokens, whether it's reducing the cost to cast and activate them, whether it's maybe whenever you generate a clue scry, so that way when you do activate the clue, you've got a little bit more card choice. Pieces and effects like that being given to those colors, especially if they become more eternalized, or I don't want to say eternalized, evergreen. Evergreen's the word. I think that's the way forward, because if we just straight up say, oh, white gets to draw cards now, we run into the same problem that we're currently seeing with green.
And I really like the idea of using things like treasures and clues, because just like you said, you know, artifacts are kind of Boros / Lorehold's thing. So to give more synergy to this already evergreen mechanic by saying, hey, yeah, you can generate clues in green, that's fine. But if you generate clues in white, you get to do a little bit more with them. That's great, without breaking anything, still giving it theme, still giving it flavor, and giving people what they want to get, which is things like card draw. Here, make a clue, sack it for some, sack it for a card, or do something with it. Clock of Omens kind of stuff, which is also kind of a Boros kind of thing. So
here's a design for you that if I could make it happen, this is what I would do. This would be the new white bomb card that I think everybody would lose their mind for just a little bit. You'd pay white for it. It's 0/3 human investigator or human advisor, whatever. It says artifacts abilities cost 1 more to activate. If you would sacrifice a clue token, tap it instead.
Oh, I like that. Oh, that's
right?
So good. So basically, your clues stay around, is what you're saying.
Yep.
And so now now you're generating clues, and before long, you've got all these clues that can now tap 3, draw a card.
I can feed my Hellkite Tyrant Wind. I can draw cards. I can tap them down for Alibu. I can do all these little things, and instead of needing to rely on strictly do thing, draw card, now I get to set up an engine. Now I have a key point of failure. And better, let's not make it a human whatever. Let's make it a spirit so we can play with the other half of the tribe we've set up. Right?
That's great.
And so just a simple card like that, I think, completely changes the landscape of what we interact with. Because imagine running both that and Dockside Extortionist and the new 3 mana artifact that gets you a food, a treasure, and a clue every time you get one. Seems great, right?
Yeah, it's a fantastic ability, while still at the same time not feeling like a green ability.
Exactly.
Not feeling like a blue ability. It doesn't feel like those, because you can draw cards with blue with spells, your instants and sorceries. You can ramp with green through your dorks or your maybe spells like cultivates. You don't really feel the whole treasure the treasure / clue thing in those identities. You really don't. Maybe a little bit more in the blue identity, but definitely, you do feel treasures and clues more in red white. That's a really cool concept.
And so if you tell me, where do I want to see white in the next 2 years? Where do I want to see red in the next 2 years? I want to see white getting more into clues, getting more into artifacts matter to me. I want to see red getting deeper into its treasure sub-theme, and I want to see them both work together to make these spirits, bring it back from the graveyard, but only for a set time, or maybe only with a set ability. Those type of effects are exactly what we want to see, and I think if Wizards is hinting at things right, that's the type of stuff we should be seeing.
So as you said that, what would I like to see? So now R&D for a day, the classic question. You've woken up. You have full control. You've become the dictator of WotC. You've fired everyone else, and now you're solely in charge of R&D.
Now I have a PhD. Oh boy.
and so all the restrictions are off. Everything is off. What would you do? And this question isn't just what would you do to Boros? What would you do
to the entire color pie? Huh?
Everything. Yeah. World's your oyster.
Okay, so here's the vision. And take a vision trip with me. I want you to think of a world where we have tax and stacks effects that are more about parity than they are about punishment. They're about catching the player with the stacks effect up rather than preventing action on other players' parts. I want them to be on uninteractable pieces. I want them to have good utility without being wild. I think white more than red, but white and red need artifact lands that don't tap for mana that have catch-up mechanics printed on them. I think that's a piece of the color pie that we need to explore more, because if we're going to say that green gets to just have every forest from here to sundown and black gets to ramp using Cabal coffers and Crypt Ghast and all that, that's fine. That's where I think the power lies. Make the artifact synergy exist in white, make the artifact synergy exist in red, and put it on a piece that has the same type of social protection that green's ramp does. Because what that allows for us to do is it still allows us to get hit by targeted hate, right? Same as a Ghost Quarter or a Strip Line or a Wasteland, which I think are all more or less fair effects. I'm sure you'd have some people down the power levels telling me, oh no, he blew up my one land and therefore he is evil, kill him. Yeah. But by and large, we're probably talking at a level where that sort of thing's okay. And so I'd like to see that space expand. I'd like to see them do more with lands like they've done with Urza's Saga in this sort of mono artifact idea coming up here from Modern Horizons 2. In fact, I almost want to say that red should have a lot more to do with land sagas, because it's a very impulsive thing, right? Mm-hmm. Playing a land that's going to go away in 3 turns, but if I can make it through those 3 turns, all of a sudden I've got some payoff. Mm-hmm. And having a payoff, like, as long as this land is on its second saga counter, whenever another player plays a land, make a treasure. Have one in white that says whenever another player plays a land, make a clue. Effects like that, I think, are where we're going to be finding more of R&D's focus moving forward, at least especially if I was in charge. For black, I really would like to see black get more of a focus around providing its owner with things rather than spending so much time ruffling through other people's things. That's something I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've noticed this in the age of Webcam Commander. There are a lot of black decks that aren't super playable unless you've got a stack of Infinite tokens sitting around. Mm-hmm. Simply because, trying to keep track of what you're working with, things you've stolen, etc., they're not great. And so I'd like to see that toned down a little bit. But one thing I think black really deserves out of all of this is an easier way to have a firm mono black strategy that isn't you've lost all your life and I've gained all your life. Mm-hmm. I'd really like to see them tilt a little bit more into this discard and damage strategy that punishes these all-in effects. For blue, I want to see a lot more spells on spells and creatures on creatures. One of the things that I think blue's been doing a lot of recently, and I was hoping to see more of it, was the pirates who made treasures when they entered the battlefield. I thought that was a very blue mechanic. It was, hey, I got a body, but he's really just here to help me cast my spells. I think that's great. I want to see less of, hey, I have a body and he drew me cards. Mm-hmm.
The classic Archaeomancer, the classic, whatever that is.
Yeah.
He gets something back. He basically does a spell in a body. ETB. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, and part of the reason I want that to get toned down a little is blue has this obsession with getting value on value. They put hats on hats all the time. And it really doesn't work when they also get access to things like the new Suspend, the 1 mana exile something for 2 turns.
Swords to timeshares is what people are calling it.
Oh my god, I love Swords to Timeshares. Holy buckets, that's great. Oh,
Swords.
that's so good.
Yeah, suspend. Yeah, Swords to timeshares. I love it.
Beautiful, beautiful. But that's the kind of card that if you're gonna have something like that, you can't also get stuff like when you cast this spell, bounce another creature. When this enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards on that new affinity for artifacts flyer. And don't get me wrong, I think that's actually a fairly costed spell. I'm not trying to say that it's wildly broken, but you can't have both sides of that same coin, because if you can suspend your own stuff, if you can bounce your own things, if you can have these flicker effects, blue pays you off too much on the spells side rather than on the creature side, because you're not exposing your own stuff to danger like white has to. You're not risking a card by playing those types of strategies. This is one of the reasons back around Ixalan why that mono blue tempo aggro deck was such a monster to play against, is because you had to invest essentially nothing to get things like 5/5s on the board. You can pay 1 mana and tempo them an entire turn. And don't get me wrong, Suspend is clearly much more of a constructed card than a 60 card constructed card than it is an EDH card. But that is indicative of the overall mindset. Whereas when we come back to green, I would like to see green refocus itself around a well-protected payoff bomb that still has the ability to be countered, that still has the ability to be removed, that still has the ability to be answered. Mm-hmm. Because I think one thing that we've seen a lot of in green recently is, wait, it does that? Wait, it does that? Wait, it does it? Because, be honest with me. Could you read from memory Questing Beast to me right now?
No.
Exactly.
No.
It's impossible. I'm not even sure I could do it.
Yeah.
I know it's got haste. I know it's got vigilance. I think it has reach for some reason.
Or trample.
Or is it?
Yeah.
Is it death touch? And this is what I mean. And that's a 4 mana 4/4. And the rate at which they're getting things in green is in some ways poisoning their own slice of the color pie. Because now, what do you do to make people not play Questing Beast? Mm-hmm. How do you get that out of a deck and get a new green card in that deck? And that's the problem I think we're going to see in green over the next couple of years, is what's exciting for them. They've by and large explored their horizons. And what I think might do it, is things like Thrasta, where you have to do something that isn't super comfortable in your color pie, but you get a huge payoff.
Yep.
Where you have to stretch a little bit, where you have to do something like Gaia's Will, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're getting a Yawgmoth's Will, but you can't cast it. You got to wait a bunch of turns, and maybe by the time that happens, you don't have the things you need to go off. I really would like to see green set itself up more as the, oh, that worked? Oh boy, color, rather than the, oh, well, obviously I just ramp into Questing Beast and win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so,
give people downsides.
Yeah.
Give people a downside. Like, make something, if you want to make something hyper costed, give them a downside for doing it. Hey, I'm going to be able to get it out earlier, 4/4 for 4 that has 3 keywords. So you've already, not only have you passed the vanilla test, you've blown it clean out of the water. That thing should cost 7 right now without even the rest of the text on the dumb thing.
Yeah.
Give it a downside, make it so that it doesn't untap except for every other turn or something like that. Give people a reason to say, maybe I want to play this over here because I don't want to pay that downside. And by the way, big costs, those aren't downsides.
No,
we're too far into Magic's history to get into that, especially in green. 6 means nothing in green. 4 means nothing in green.
One thing I thought really was going well for a while for green was the idea that play this spell only from non-land permanents mana. Mm-hmm. Or, sorry, that's a really horrible way to phrase that. Cast this spell using only mana produced by non-land permanents. Mm-hmm. That's a great thing. Give me restrictions. Give me rituals. Make me work for it. But giving me 8 hierarchs in a modern deck and saying play whatever you want, that's not it, Chief,
Yeah.
And so I think ultimately when we talk about, what would I do with the color pie, I think by and large Wizards is already doing. Mm-hmm. I think they've kind of got a problem in that they heard complaints about Green's standard power and ended up jacking up Green's EDH power. And that's just a world that we have to live in from now on.
That's true. And I think they've been doing well about starting to segment where these things start to belong. Modern Horizons 2 is a classic example. Here's a bunch of busted cards that aren't going to break standard, but, maybe they'll do some real work inside of Commander/Modern, create a whole new Modern environment. People are ranting and raving about how we are entering a Modern 2.0.
Oh, it's wild. I mean, now my good friend Nikachu is going to make fun of me for this, but Merfolk has been a meme deck for years. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's 4-0ing, 5-0ing. It's taking down invitationals, all because they got 2 or 3 really hype cards in this set.
Yeah.
And that's great. I love that. The problem then becomes, now what do you do to make Tron that good again? What do you do to make humans that good again? What's the next step up? And that's the problem that we keep coming back to with Magic, and they keep solving. I'm going to be honest with you here. We're coming up on 30 years of Magic cards getting printed. 30 years of effects and interactions. And I have to be honest with you, I love where Magic's at. All these complaints, all this kvetching I've been doing about white and design and all this other stuff, I don't think we're in that bad a spot. Yeah, is it unequal? Sure it is, but something has to be weakest. That's just how life is. And it'll flow and it'll ebb. But the core of this, just from my own perspective, is that Wizards is doing an amazing job balancing all this, and based on what they're showing me with their intent on sets like this, I don't have very many concerns. The biggest concerns I have is that they're going to try to cater too much to EDH players when EDH players might not necessarily know what they actually want. And so what I'm really concerned about in my bones is that we're going to see White have those breaks taken off. Instead of Quintorius saying when 1 or more are exiled, I'm worried about the first time they print something whenever.
Yep, whenever a card leaves, all of a sudden I'm creating spirits for just no reason because I've Tormod's Crypt my own graveyard and generated 100 things. Yeah.
Exactly. The thing that I think needs to happen is you need to put the brakes back on Green, and you need to give other colors answers to the things that it's been doing. And I don't think we're too far off from that. It would really only take a year or so of development. It really isn't that wild or wacky or inflatable arm tube meant. But we are in a world where if we don't start seeing some of those changes that we've talked about, and again, I think we're in that world, but if we aren't in that world, you're going to see some folks double down on these things to the point where the only way to get them back out of that is to break White, is to break Red, is to break Boros. And I really desperately want to avoid that.
I agree. And I think that a big part of I'm not going to say it's a problem because it's not a problem, but we as Commander players have very short-term memories. Mm-hmm. And some of that is, guilty of the longtime players. And also there's some of that is just sometimes the average age, quote unquote, of the Commander player, or tenure, if you will, isn't long. They've been playing for 18 months, 12 months. Yeah. Hey, I built a white deck and it's awful. It's like, well, mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine, but that's not to say that it's not balanced because you didn't see maybe all of the cards over Magic's history could do X, Y, and Z with your white deck. But don't just go crying immediately just because the Simic player was able to draw and ramp and you weren't. So your solution isn't to just let me draw and ramp. So exactly. You have to think about a lot more because, like you said, 30-year history coming up on. There's a lot in Magic's history, and having that short tenure can really give you a tunnel vision to where maybe you don't know exactly what that might do to your color pie, what to your color combination even. Don't just give Boros unlimited card draw and ramp because you don't know the implications around it, and for all you know it could cause all kinds of problems. So that's something to also think about in that aspect.
Absolutely. Ultimately, though, I do want to say if we can get more non-standard sets, honestly, I think that would be a boon to the game. Even if they weren't necessarily full, developed, draftable sets, I think stuff like unsanctioned, if it wasn't silver bordered, would be a fantastic way to print new things, not only into Modern, but into other Eternal formats. And I'd really like to see more of this come up because I feel by and large, Wizards is worried about Standard being too complex, and I think that's a fair worry. However, I also think that the community, especially the entrenched community, has shown that we're willing to teach folks, we're willing to be the onboarding process for them, and that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if people are playing your game wrong because either we'll show them how to play it right or they'll figure it out themselves.
That's right. Yeah, and we've been seeing Jumpstart. We've been seeing Double Masters. We've been seeing Time Spiral Remaster. We've been seeing those, and every time they've been a success. They've been doing great. So definitely Wizards, keep doing that. Very good. Let Standard be Standard. Let Modern be Modern. Let Legacy be Legacy. And let Commander be Commander. And we know that they all intermingle, and that's fine. But you have the ability through the sets you create to create these pockets, to create this available only in Modern, but not in Standard. You have the ability to do that. You control the game. Only in Commander, only in Legacy, which is, I guess, everything, come to think of it. So maybe not Legacy. Don't worry about Legacy.
I don't think anybody does anymore.
Oh, sick burns. All right. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. Well, with that, I think it's a really good point to start wrapping it up. So a huge thank you to Alex. Really wonderful having you on the show today. Had a really, really good talks. I can't tell you how wonderful this has been, really. I'm just going to sing your praises a million times. So, but tell the listeners / viewers where they can find you and some stuff that you have coming down the pipe.
Absolutely. Well, my name's Spike Feeder Alex. You can find me on Twitter under that name. I'm a member of the Spike Feeders, as it says on the tin. You can find those folks on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere really. Just the Spike Feeders. Go check us out. I do want to shout out real quick my own Magic podcast that I do with Mana Curves. That's Scry7. You can find that on most major podcatchers, along with Twitter under the same name. Come check us out. We just try to do a little bit more light and just positive spin on Magic news for the week. We do that most Fridays, and it's just sort of a hey, let's just sit around and talk Magic. But as far as things I think you should check out from us, I really would encourage you all to go check out our Spike on the Mic series, especially the ones that Jim and I have been doing around how to socially interact with Commander. I think especially with a lot of new players coming into the game, when we get back to being able to play in person, having a good way to interact with folks is super tops.
Awesome. All right. So all those links will be in the description below. Once again, thank you very much, Alex, for joining us. And with that, we're going to close it up. So big shout out to our sponsors, Patreon. So viewers like you, TCG Player, and Dragon Shield. Thanks a lot for all of your support and help. And with that, we're going to close it. So tune in next time when we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. Thanks a lot, everyone.